George and Rascal's happy home. The morning sun, filtered through the lace curtains of George's kitchen window, painted dancing squares on the checkered linoleum. George, humming a tuneless melody, carefully spooned coffee grounds into his ancient percolator. Rascal, a whirlwind of golden fur and boundless energy, whined impatiently at his feet, tail thumping a staccato rhythm against the worn wooden cabinets. All right, hold your horses, you furry fiend," George chuckled, his voice raspy but warm. He poured the fragrant coffee, the rich aroma filling the small room. A piece of bacon, liberated from the sizzling pan, magically appeared in Rascal's expectant maw. "There you go. Now, patience is a virtue, remember?" Rascal, bacon devoured, responded with a lick to George's hand and a happy bark that resonated through the quiet house. He understood patience about as well as George understood quantum physics, which is to say, not at all. But he knew it meant good things were coming. The garden called. George, mug in hand, shuffled out the back door, Rascal bounding ahead, a yellow streak against the emerald green lawn. George's garden was his pride and joy, a riot of color and fragrant herbs meticulously arranged in neat rows. Roses, their petals heavy with dew, climbed the weathered fence, and plump tomatoes ripened on their vines, promising a summer bounty. He pulled a stubborn weed, the rich earth clinging to his wrinkled hands, and Rascal busied himself chasing butterflies, a comical dance of leaps and bounds. "Easy there, lad," George cautioned, watching Rascal narrowly miss trampling a row of burgeoning basil. "Don't want to squash my dinner, do we?" The morning passed in a comfortable rhythm of weeding, watering, and gentle conversation between George and his canine companion. George spoke his thoughts aloud, a habit he'd developed over the years. Rascal, ever the attentive listener, offered the occasional woof or enthusiastic tail wag in response. It wasn't so much a conversation as it was a comfortable, shared existence. Later, inside the house, the energy shifted. The garden tools were put away, the sun climbed higher in the sky, and it was time for play. "Fetch, Rascal! Fetch!" George called, grabbing a well-worn tennis ball from the wicker basket by the fireplace. Rascal's eyes lit up, and he vibrated with anticipation. The living room, a cozy space filled with mismatched furniture and overflowing bookshelves, became their arena. George, despite his age, threw the ball with surprising force, and Rascal, a blow of motion, chased after it, returning it to George's feet with a triumphant bark. The game continued, a joyful cacophony of thumping paws, enthusiastic barks, and George's hearty laughter. A stray throw sent the ball careening toward a delicate porcelain figurine on the mantelpiece a shepherdess George's late wife, Mary, had cherished. George gasped, his heart leaping into his throat, but Rascal, with an agility that belied his playful nature, intercepted the ball mid-air, gently nudging it away from the precarious object. George stared at Rascal, a mixture of relief and astonishment on his face. "Good boy, Rascal. Good boy," he exclaimed, showering the dog with praise and affectionate scratches. He'd underestimated the old dog. Eventually, exhausted but content, Rascal collapsed at George's feet, his breathing deep and rhythmic. George settled into his favorite armchair, a worn leather monstrosity that had seen better days, and opened his book, a dog-eared copy of Moby Dick. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. The words swam before George's eyes. He tried to focus on Captain Ahab's relentless pursuit of the white whale, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the morning, to the garden, to the near miss with Mary's figurine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, a disquiet that lingered beneath the surface of his peaceful existence. He glanced at Rascal, sleeping soundly, his body twitching occasionally as he chased rabbits in his dreams. A fierce wave of protectiveness washed over George. He wouldn't let anything, or anyone, disturb their little slice of paradise. He'd worked too hard to create it. A sharp rap at the front door shattered the tranquility. Rascal's head snapped up, his ears perked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. George felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Visitors were rare in these parts, and unannounced visitors even rarer. Especially on a Thursday. He marked his page, closed the book, and stood up, his movements slow but deliberate. Rascal, sensing his unease, pressed close to his leg, his presence a comforting weight. "Who is it?" George called out, his voice firm despite the apprehension swirling within him. A woman's voice, crisp and professional, responded, "Mr. Merriweather. I'm here to discuss a matter of legal importance." Legal importance. George's grip tightened on his walking stick, a gnarled piece of oak he'd found years ago in the woods. This couldn't be good. Carol and Bob's growing concern. The sound of tires grinding on the gravel had become a daily intrusion. George grimaced, snipping a thorny stem from a rose. The familiar glint of Carol's Lexus materialized down the lane, with Bob's ashen face a pale blob riding shotgun. "Surprise!" Carol announced, her greeting a practiced melody that didn't quite mask the calculation in her eyes. Bob shuffled out, resembling a chastised schoolboy. Rascal, initially hopeful for a treat, sensed the tension radiating from George and planted himself at his side, a low grumble vibrating in his throat. "Well, isn't this unexpected?" George remarked, meticulously disposing of the clipped bloom. He straightened, wiping his hands on the worn fabric of his gardening apron. "I thought you were occupied." "Oh, you know Carol," Bob muttered, fiddling with his tie knot. Carol flashed him a look sharp enough to shatter glass. "We just wanted to see how you were, George," she cooed, her voice syrupy sweet. "Make sure you're all right. All alone out here." "Rascal keeps me company," George retorted, scratching the dog's neck. Rascal's tail thumped a steady rhythm against his leg, the rumble softening to a low whimper. Carol's gaze swept the meticulously maintained garden, lingering on the sculpted hedges and riot of colorful blossoms. "It's quite an undertaking, isn't it? For one person, especially at your age." George's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "I manage perfectly well." They advanced towards the house, Carol leading with unnerving assurance, Bob trailing behind like a shadow. Inside, Carol commenced her inspection, a white-gloved finger tracing the surface of the mantelpiece, her eyes probing shadowed corners, punctuated by little clicks of disapproval. "Dust," she declared, her nose wrinkling in distaste. "You really should hire someone to help with the cleaning, George. You're not as young as you used to be, are you?" George ignored her, heading for the familiar comfort of the kitchen to prepare tea. "Tea," he offered, the invitation born more of habit than true hospitality. "That would be lovely, dear," Carol replied, settling onto a kitchen stool. Bob remained hovering in the doorway, a study in nervous energy. As George tended the kettle, Carol launched into a well-rehearsed discourse on the perils of solitude, the necessity of balanced meals, and the mounting burdens of property upkeep. Bob, emboldened by Carol's presence, added his voice. "The roof looks like it could use attention, George," he observed, squinting upwards. "And the gutters, probably choked with leaves. That can cause real damage." George poured the steaming tea, his movements precise and measured. He placed a cup before Carol, then one before Bob, who gratefully collapsed onto the stool. He remained standing, a silent sentinel. "I appreciate your concern," George stated, his voice a low, deliberate cadence. "But I am entirely capable of caring for myself and this house." Carol sipped her tea, her eyes narrowing over the rim. "Of course, dear. We only worry. Remember last week when you couldn't find your glasses? And the stove you left on? George's grip tightened on his teacup. He remembered perfectly well, his glasses had been perched on his forehead. And he clearly recalled turning off the burner. Carol was twisting his reality, exaggerating his missteps, planting noxious seeds of doubt. Those things happen to everyone, Carol, he said, his voice edged with steel. Of course, dear, Carol echoed, her smile unwavering, a mask of false concern. But it's always best to be cautious. We wouldn't want anything to befall you, George. Especially with all this responsibility. She gestured with a manicured hand, encompassing the house and its surrounding land in a single, covetous sweep. Bob nodded vehemently, his eyes flitting between George and Carol, like a trapped bird. It's a lot to handle, George. A lot of maintenance. And the taxes, of course. The taxes must be astronomical. George regarded them, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. He understood their game. He knew their desires. And he knew he couldn't surrender to them. He took a deliberate sip of his tea, relishing the bitter taste. The battle, he realized, was fully engaged. Rascal nudged his palm with his wet nose, emitting a low, comforting whine. George rested his hand on the dog's head, drawing strength from the silent connection. The plot unveiled. Sunlight fragmented into miniature rainbows as the hose sprayed the roses. A tuneless whistle escaped George's lips, accompanied by the rich, earthy perfume of damp soil and blossoms. He lingered at the flower bed closest to the house, aware of how the old walls amplified sound. Though he doubted he'd hear anything of note. Carol and Bob were likely still lavishing praise on his spoon collection, or some other bauble that had captured Carol's acquisitive gaze. Inside, Carol stalked across the faded rug, her voice a brittle whisper of contained rage. Honestly, Bob, how much longer must we endure this charade? The man's practically mummified. Sunny Meadows is the answer, then we list this house. Bob, perched uncomfortably on George's worn armchair, wrung his hands. Carol, we can't just abandon him there. He'd be desolate. And what if he resists? Resists? Carol spat, venom coating each word. He's an old man, Bob, easily disoriented. We'll present it as a respite, a short holiday. Once he's settled, he won't even recall owning this place. Her hand drifted along the mantel, her eyes surveying the room with undisguised avarice. Imagine, Bob. This house, the grounds, we could finally settle the lake house and still have plenty to spare. George's grip tightened on the hose. The water sputtered and faltered, drenching a cluster of petunias. He barely noticed. Sunny Meadows. A bleak, impersonal institution on the edge of town, where the elderly were shelved and forgotten. Bob fidgeted. But what if he learns the truth? What if he alters his will? Carol ceased her pacing and glared at Bob. He won't. I've already assisted him in updating it. With our names duly noted, of course. And as for discovery, that's where you play your part, darling. Keep him amused with his tales and his stamps. Keep him compliant. I'll orchestrate the rest. Outside, Rascal emitted a soft whine, nosing George's leg. George knelt, pressing his face into the dog's comforting fur, finding solace in the familiar scent. He needed composure, clarity. He couldn't betray the depth of their betrayal. He stroked Rascal's ears, the soothing rhythm a small anchor in the mounting storm within him. I still have reservations, Carol, Bob muttered, his voice barely reaching the garden. It feels wrong. Carol's tightly wound patience finally snapped. Wrong? What's wrong is us toiling away, while that old miser hoards a fortune. We are entitled to this, Bob. We've earned it. Years of enduring his peculiarities, his unending war stories, his preposterous hats. George straightened. The hose slipped from his grasp, thrashing across the grass like a disturbed snake, spewing water in a wild arc. He left it where it lay. The roses could wait. Far more urgent matters demanded his attention. He moved toward the house, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He could feel the slow burn of anger beneath his impassive expression, threatening to explode. He drew a steadying breath, forcing himself to remain in control. He needed to project the image of the same doddering old fool they believed they could manipulate. Reaching the porch, he paused, listening. The argument had faded, replaced by a tense quiet. He could almost feel their probing stares. He squared his shoulders, a hard light flickering in his gaze. They desired a conflict. He would deliver. And George Merriweather, armed only with his wits and his steadfast companion, was poised to fight. He opened the door. Tricked and trapped. The clinking of china drew George from his newspaper. Carol, all saccharine smiles, entered the living room carrying a steaming teapot and a delicate porcelain cup. Bob trailed behind her, looking unusually pale. "Just the man I wanted to see," Carol chirped, placing the tea set on the mahogany side table. "I've made you a special blend, George. Chamomile, lavender, a touch of honey. Perfect for a little afternoon nap." George eyed the tea with suspicion. He wasn't usually one for herbal remedies, preferring a strong cup of English breakfast, but he couldn't very well refuse without raising Carol's antennae. "That's very thoughtful of you, Carol," he said, forcing a smile. Rascal, sensing his unease, nudged his hand with his wet nose. George scratched behind the dog's ears reassuringly. Carol poured a cup, the fragrant steam swirling upwards. "Drink up, George. You've been looking a bit tired lately." She offered him the cup with a practiced, concerned expression. Bob shifted his weight from one foot to the other, avoiding George's gaze. His silence spoke volumes. George took a small sip. The tea was surprisingly pleasant, the floral notes calming. He finished the cup, feeling a strange warmth spreading through his limbs. "They're all gone," Carol said brightly, snatching the cup away. "Now, why don't you lie down for a bit? I'll wake you in a couple of hours." She steered him towards his favorite armchair, her grip surprisingly firm. He settled into the soft cushions, feeling a wave of drowsiness wash over him. "Just for a little while," he mumbled, his eyelids growing heavy. Rascal whined softly, nuzzling his face. George managed a weak pat before succumbing to the overwhelming fatigue. The next sensation was one of jarring discomfort. He was lying on a narrow, unfamiliar bed. The room was sterile, painted in a pale, institutional green. Sunlight filtered through a barred window, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. A faint smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Panic seized him. Where was he? He sat up, his head throbbing. Rascal was nowhere to be seen. The door creaked open, and Carol and Bob entered, their faces etched with forced sympathy. "George, darling, you're awake," Carol exclaimed, rushing to his side. She grasped his hand, her grip cold and clammy. "Where am I?" George croaked, his voice raspy. "You at Sunny Meadows, George," Bob said, his voice barely above a whisper. He still couldn't meet George's eyes. Sunny Meadows. The name sent a chill down George's spine. It was a renowned assisted living facility, known for its finality. "What's going on?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Carol squeezed his hand tighter. We've brought you here for your own good, George. You need care. Care. I'm perfectly fine. He tried to stand, but his legs felt weak and unsteady. The tea. It had been drugged. Now, George, don't get upset, Carol soothed. You've been having some memory lapses lately. And your balance isn't what it used to be. Sunny Meadows is the perfect place for you to relax and get the help you need. This is about the will, isn't it? George accused, his voice rising. You two are trying to steal my estate. Bob flinched, finally looking at George. It's not like that, George. We just want what's best for you. Best for you, you mean, George retorted, his anger simmering. You tricked me. You drugged me. Carol sighed dramatically. We did what we had to do, George. You weren't thinking clearly. You need supervision. He looked from Carol's cold, calculating face to Bob's miserable, guilt-ridden one. The truth was laid bare. They had betrayed him in the most despicable way. You'll never get away with this, George said, his voice low and dangerous. I'll fight you every step of the way. Carol smiled, a chillingly confident smile. We have power of attorney, George. You signed it months ago. Remember? He did remember. He'd signed it, trusting them, believing their lies. He'd been so foolish, so blind. Bob wrung his hands. Please, George, just cooperate. It will be easier for everyone. Cooperate? George repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You think I'm just going to roll over and let you steal my life? He looked around the sterile room, at the barred window, at the faces of his betrayers. He was trapped, but not defeated. Not yet. This isn't over, he vowed, his eyes burning with defiance. Not by a long shot. Life at Sunny Meadows. The linoleum floor of the Sunny Meadows dining hall gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting a sea of faces George didn't recognize, and didn't particularly want to. He sat alone at a table meant for four, a tray of bland, mashed food sitting untouched before him. The air hung thick with the scent of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables, a far cry from the earthy aroma of his own garden. He poked at the pale, unidentifiable protein with his fork, the metallic tang doing nothing to whet his appetite. Around him, residents mumbled to themselves, shuffled cards, or stared blankly ahead. A woman with vibrant purple hair attempted to engage him in conversation, asking about his lovely cardigan, but her words slurred together, and her gaze drifted aimlessly. George managed a polite nod and turned back to his food, the exchange leaving him feeling even more isolated. It was like being trapped in a slow-motion silent film, the actors moving without purpose or passion. He pushed the tray away, the clatter echoing in the cavernous room. His stomach churned, not from hunger, but from a deep, gnawing loneliness. He missed the familiar weight of Rascal resting his head on his knee, the cheerful chaos of birdsong in his garden, the satisfying ache in his muscles after a day spent tending his roses. Here, there was only emptiness, a void filled with forced smiles and vapid small talk. Later, confined to his small, sterile room, George found himself drawn to the window. The view offered a glimpse of a carefully manicured lawn, dotted with identical flower beds bursting with brightly colored impatiens. It was pretty, he supposed, in a generic, soulless way. Nothing like the wild profusion of his own garden, where honeysuckle climbed freely and vegetables ripened under the warm sun. He longed for the feel of soil beneath his fingernails, the scent of tomato leaves clinging to his hands. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, a wave of despair washing over him. He was a gardener, a caretaker, a man of the earth. Here, he was nothing, a forgotten relic relegated to a life of monotonous routine. Breakfast at 8, bingo at 10, lunch at 12, nap time at 2, dinner at 5, and then, nothing. Just the endless drone of the television, and the slow creep of the clock hands. Suddenly, a sharp bark echoed in his memory, and his heart ached with a longing so intense it stole his breath. "Rascal," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He moved closer to the window, cupping his hands around his mouth. "Rascal," he called out, a little louder this time, hoping against hope that his loyal companion might somehow hear him. A nurse, a plump woman with a perpetually harried expression, bustled into the room. "Mr. Merriweather," she said, her voice sharp. "Are you all right? What's all the commotion?" George straightened, trying to compose himself. I was just calling my dog," he mumbled, feeling foolish. The nurse sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Mr. Merriweather, you know pets aren't allowed here. It's in the rules." "But he's my family," George protested, his voice cracking. "I understand," the nurse said, her tone softening slightly. "But rules are rules. Now, why don't you sit down and I'll get you a cup of chamomile tea? It will help you relax." George shook his head, the offer of tea only reminding him of Carol and Bob's treachery. "No, thank you," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I just want to go home." The nurse patted his arm awkwardly. "I know, dear. We all do. But this is your home now. Try to make the best of it." She bustled out, leaving George alone once more. He stared out the window, the manicured lawn a mocking reminder of everything he had lost. He clenched his fists, a spark of defiance igniting within him. They might have taken his home, his garden, his freedom, but they hadn't taken his spirit. And he wasn't about to let them. He would find a way out of this place, a way to reclaim his life, and a way to make Carol and Bob pay for their betrayal. He owed it to himself, and he owed it to Rascal. A kindred spirit. The Sunny Meadows recreation room hummed, a peculiar blend of day-old coffee and cloying lotion permeating the air. Bingo night. George usually gave it a wide berth, preferring the quiet of his private space, but tonight the incessant blare from the television had driven him out. He sat huddled in a corner, observing the others with detached curiosity. "All right, eyes down, dabbers ready," a vibrant voice chirped, cutting through the hum. At the front, a young woman with a dark, flowing mane and an inviting smile brandished the bingo cage, her enthusiasm contagious. "Let's hear it for N31. George's gaze barely flickered towards his card. He hadn't participated in bingo since Agnes had coerced him to that church social 20 years prior. Agnes. A wave of melancholy washed over him, a familiar ache that accompanied any recollection of his past. B12. Anyone need a B12? The woman, Lily Chen, her name tag proclaimed, cast a searching glance across the room, her eyes sparkling with genuine encouragement. George mechanically marked B12. What was the point, really? Even a bingo victory wouldn't liberate him from this place. As Lily continued her numerical pronouncements, her voice a spark of youthful vitality in the stale atmosphere, George found himself intrigued by her sincere dedication. She wasn't simply performing a task, she seemed genuinely invested in cheering up the residents. A triumphant cry suddenly pierced the air. Bingo! Lily hurried over, clapping with delight. "We have a winner. Congratulations, Mrs. Higgins." She assisted Mrs. Higgins in claiming her prize, a modest box of chocolates, exhibiting the same fervor she had shown during the game. As the next round was announced, Lily approached George. "Hi there," she greeted him, her smile a warm beacon. I don't think I've seen you here before. George grunted, his eyes glued to his card. First time. Doubt there'll be a second. Lily drew up a chair. I'm Lily. And you are? George, he mumbled, reluctantly meeting her eyes. Pleasure to meet you, George. So, what brings you to Sunny Meadows? He hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Life, I suppose. Lily's smile softened with understanding. Life can be complicated, indeed. What did you do before Sunny Meadows became home? He glanced down at his age-worn hands, the hands that had nurtured his garden for half a century. I kept a garden. Grew the finest tomatoes around, if I may say so. A spark of pride flickered across his face, quickly doused by the weight of his present predicament. Tomatoes, you say? I adore tomatoes, Lily replied. My grandmother used to make the most incredible tomato sauce. Her secret, she always claimed, was the absolute freshest ingredients. George found himself drawn into the conversation, recalling his garden, the heady fragrance of basil, the hum of bees amidst the zucchini flowers. He even shared anecdotes about Rascal, his devoted canine companion, his voice faltering slightly as he recounted the dog's mischievous escapades. Lily listened attentively, her eyes reflecting genuine interest. She inquired about his gardening methods, about Rascal's lineage, about his favorite culinary creations. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer judgment, didn't dispense hollow reassurances. She simply listened. You seem troubled, George, she observed gently, after a moment of quiet. Is everything all right? He sighed, the burden of his secret and his isolation weighing heavily upon him. Let's just say I didn't exactly request a reservation. Lily's brow furrowed with concern. What do you mean by that? He hesitated again, his instincts battling with his need for human connection. Could he place his trust in her? Something in her compassionate eyes, her sincere concern, suggested that he could. My family, he began, his voice barely audible, they checked me in. Said I was no longer capable of caring for myself. Sold my house, my garden, everything I had. Lily's expression darkened. They signed you in? Against your will? George nodded, his gaze fixed on his bingo card, the numbers swimming before his eyes. They were after my estate. Pure and simple. He saw a flash of indignation in Lily's eyes, swiftly replaced by resolve. That's awful, George. Utterly unacceptable. She paused, choosing her words with care. There are options. The law offers protection against such actions. George looked up at her, a nascent spark of hope flickering within him. You think so? Lily met his gaze, her voice resolute. I know so. I'm a lawyer, George. And I firmly believe that everyone deserves dignity and respect. What they did to you is wrong, and I'm willing to help you fight back. The bingo numbers blurred into insignificance, supplanted by the possibility of reclaiming his life. For the first time since arriving at Sunny Meadows, George felt a surge of hope, a glimmer of defiance, and a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected ally who had entered his life. The game played on around them, but George was no longer focused on bingo. He was playing for his freedom. A plan takes shape. The bingo cards lay forgotten on the table, their brightly colored numbers mocking the darkness settling in George's gut. He watched Lily gather her things, her movements efficient yet gentle. Lily, he began, his voice raspy with suppressed emotion, I need to tell you something. Something important. She paused, her hand hovering over her overflowing tote bag. Of course, George. What is it? Her brow furrowed with genuine concern, the fluorescent lights reflecting in her kind eyes. He gestured towards a quieter corner of the activity room, a space shielded from the lingering chatter of the bingo players. "Let's sit over there." He recounted the events leading up to his forced relocation, the slow, insidious creeping in of Carol and Bob's influence, the manufactured concerns about his deteriorating health, the carefully worded legal documents he'd unknowingly signed. He spoke of their thinly veiled impatience, their eagerness to take control of his finances, his home, his life. As he spoke, the words tumbled out, a dam finally breaking after weeks of agonizing silence. He described the gnawing feeling of betrayal, the utter helplessness of being stripped of his autonomy. Lily listened intently, her expression shifting from gentle concern to barely contained fury. She made notes on a small pad, her pen scratching furiously against the paper. When he finished, the silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. "George," she said softly, her voice laced with a mixture of sympathy and resolve, "this is appalling. What they did is absolutely wrong." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You believe me?" "Of course, I believe you. And more importantly, the law believes you. You have rights, George. Significant rights that have been violated." She explained the concepts of undue influence, elder abuse, and the potential for contesting the legal documents Carol and Bob had tricked him into signing. She spoke of regaining his power of attorney, challenging his guardianship, and ultimately, reclaiming his home and his independence. The legal jargon swirled around him, a complex web of terms and procedures, but the underlying message was clear: he wasn't powerless. He had a fighting chance. A spark flickered within him, a tiny ember of hope refusing to be extinguished. "But they have lawyers, Lily. Good ones, I imagine. They've thought this through." He slumped back in his chair, the weight of his predicament threatening to crush him once more. Lily leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "And so will we. George, I want to help you. Pro bono. I know this place isn't exactly teeming with high-profile legal cases, and frankly, I could use a challenge. More importantly, I can't stand by and watch this happen." He stared at her, dumbfounded. "You'd do that? For me?" "Absolutely. You deserve justice, George. And I'm going to help you get it." She paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "We can start by filing a petition to have you declared competent and challenging the guardianship. We can also explore the possibility of suing Carol and Bob for financial exploitation and emotional distress." The thought of suing his own family, even after their betrayal, felt strange, unsettling. "Sue them? I don't know, Lily. Think of it not as suing your family, George, but as protecting yourself. As reclaiming what is rightfully yours. They forced your hand. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's the only language some people understand." Rascal, sensing his master's turmoil, nudged his hand with his wet nose. George stroked his fur, drawing strength from the dog's unwavering loyalty. He looked back at Lily, her face etched with determination. "All right," he said, his voice stronger now, infused with a newfound resolve. "All right, Lily. Let's do it. Let's sue the pants off them." A small smile played on Lily's lips. "That's the spirit, George. That's the spirit." She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. "Call me tomorrow. We'll set up a time to meet and go over the details." As Lily walked away, George clutched the card in his hand, the smooth paper a tangible symbol of hope. He watched her disappear through the doorway, then looked down at Rascal, who wagged his tail expectantly. "Well, boy," he said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips, looks like we are going to war." He scratched Rascal behind the ears. "And this time, we are fighting back." The linoleum floor felt a little less cold beneath his feet, the fluorescent lights a little less harsh. The fight for his freedom had begun. Fighting for freedom. The courthouse, a cathedral of cool marble, resonated with a peculiar power. George, Rascal's leash taut in his grip, observed Lily as she presented the substantial legal file to the clerk. Each document represented a bulwark against Carol and Bob's avarice. Hope rekindled within him, a sensation dormant since the arrival of the grim social worker. Merriweather versus Stern, the clerk intoned, the stamp's impact echoing like a judge's gavel. Case number 2024-47B. Notification of the hearing will follow. Lily's smile, radiant and authentic, crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Thank you." Turning to George, she announced, "It's filed. The lawsuit is official." Back at Sunny Meadows, even the antiseptic tang couldn't diminish George's swelling satisfaction. He envisioned Carol's reaction upon receiving the news, Bob's nervous tremor. That very evening, a certified mail carrier approached Carol and Bob's meticulously manicured residence. Carol, adjusting her expensive silk scarf, greeted the carrier with a practiced air, expecting a delivery from her favorite online retailer. The sight of the official envelope instantly clouded her face. "What's this?" she demanded, snatching it. Bob, peering over her shoulder, watched as she tore it open. The stark words "summons" and "lawsuit" practically jumped off the page. Her face suffused with angry color. "That doddering fool," she exclaimed, crushing the document in her fist. "He's actually taking us to court." Bob's eyes widened. "But how? He's confined to Sunny Meadows. Surely he's incapacitated." "Incapacitated, my eye!" Carol screeched. "That interfering attorney must be orchestrating this." She stalked the living room, the staccato clicks of her designer heels echoing on the polished floor. "I knew we should have dealt with that mutt. Probably receiving his marching orders." Bob wrung his hands anxiously. "What will we do, Carol? We can't afford to lose. Imagine the house, the investments. Do you think I'm oblivious to that?" Carol retorted, spinning around to face him. "We'll fight him, naturally. Secure a more formidable lawyer, someone who understands how to win. We will argue that he is incompetent, perhaps even slipping into dementia. Anything is fair in love and law." Meanwhile, Lily was meticulously constructing their defense. She visited George's now empty home, documenting every detail with her camera. The precisely arranged workshop, the bookcase overflowing with everything from Homer to how-to guides on furniture making, the vibrant garden filled with late-blooming flowers, each element demonstrated George's sharp intellect and capable skills. She interviewed Mrs. Higgins, George's neighbor, who willingly testified to his quick wit, gardening prowess, and regular walks with Rascal. "George always cared for his property," Mrs. Higgins said, stroking Rascal, who rested his head contentedly on her lap. "Mowed the lawn, pruned his roses, even helped me carry groceries sometimes. Sharp as a tack. This whole situation is just terrible." Lily also consulted Dr. Albright, George's primary care physician. Initially hesitant due to patient confidentiality, he eventually agreed to provide a statement, carefully crafted to protect privacy, confirming that George presented with a sound mind and a sturdy physique, without any indicators of cognitive impairment. "Mr. Merriweather is remarkably robust for someone of his years," Dr. Albright asserted. "His physical and cognitive health is consistent with a life actively lived." Back at Sunny Meadows, George waited with bated breath for updates. He occupied his days reading, nurturing the small herb garden, he had managed to cultivate outside his window, and conferring with Lily during her frequent visits. "We have a solid case, George," Lily assured him, arranging photos of his house across the small table in his room. "We have proof of your independence, your health, your mental clarity. They will struggle to argue incompetence." George nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "They underestimated me, Lily. They assumed I was simply an old man, easily dismissed. But I'm not surrendering without a fight. This is more than just about my house, it's about my very existence. My liberty." Justice served. A charged atmosphere vibrated through the courtroom. Erect in his seat, George's eyes remained glued to Judge Thompson. A reassuring touch from Lily's hand offered silent strength. Across the divide, Carol dabbed at the corners of her eyes with delicate lace, while Bob, a study in nervous energy, kept his gaze skittishly roaming. "Mr. Merriweather," Carol began, her voice a tremulous performance, "has faded. Memory eludes him. He's incapable of managing his medications, his finances. A clear and present danger to himself." Bob bobbed his head vigorously, adding, "He nearly set the place ablaze, you know. Left the burner on high." Lily stood, a note of steel in her voice. "Objection, Your Honor. These are unfounded assertions. We possess substantial evidence to refute them." She proceeded to present a series of brief video clips. The first captured George meticulously preparing breakfast, measuring each ingredient with care. Another portrayed him tending to his garden, expertly shaping rose bushes with well-honed skill. The final segment showed George and Rascal playing fetch in the sun-drenched park, George launching the ball with remarkable vigor. These visual records, Lily declared, her tone resounding with assurance, irrefutably demonstrate Mr. Merriweather's continued autonomy and mental acuity. Each was captured within the last 30 days. Carol bristled. "Those are staged. He has moments of clarity." Lily produced copies of George's bank records, immaculately kept. These document Mr. Merriweather's responsible stewardship of his own finances. Every obligation fulfilled promptly. Nowhere is there any indication of the cognitive decline alleged by the defense. The air grew heavy. Beads of perspiration dotted Bob's brow as he worried at his collar, his gaze averted. Carol, however, remained steadfast, her eyes locked on the judge. Judge Thompson, a jurist celebrated for her keen intellect and unwavering firmness, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Stern, Mr. Stern, the evidence before the court today suggests a narrative considerably different from the one you've offered. Your claims strike the court as somewhat embellished, to say the least." She paused, her eyes surveying the room. "Moreover, the circumstances surrounding Mr. Merriweather's admittance to Sunny Meadows give the court considerable pause. The paperwork was expedited, the evaluations superficial, and the motivations suspect." Silence descended as Judge Thompson cleared her throat before continuing. "Based upon the evidence presented, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. George Merriweather. The conservatorship is hereby terminated. All assets are to be immediately restored to Mr. Merriweather's possession." An audible ripple spread through the onlookers. George felt a surge of deliverance, so overwhelming it threatened to buckle him. He turned to Lily, gratitude etched on his face. Carol's carefully maintained composure shattered. Her features twisted with unmasked fury. "This is absurd. He's a doddering old fool. He doesn't have a clue." Bob merely stared blankly ahead, his mouth hanging slightly open. Judge Thompson struck the gavel with force. "Order. Mrs. Stern, the court advises you to regain your composure." She shifted her gaze back to George. "Mr. Merriweather, the court extends its best wishes. The instant they were outside, George inhaled the fresh air deeply. Lily, words fail me. There's no need, she replied, smiling softly. Justice prevailed. That's reward enough. The drive home unfolded like a pleasant dream. As the car turned into the driveway, George's spirits lifted. There he was. Rascal, his tail ablur, barking with unrestrained delight. George all but tumbled out of the car and knelt, burying his face in Rascal's thick fur. Oh, Rascal, I'm home. Really home. Rascal's enthusiastic licks were a torrent of affection. Tears pricked at George's eyes. He was free. He was home. He had Rascal. All that mattered. Later, across George's kitchen table, Lily sat facing him. He slid a document towards her. My updated will. Lily scanned it, her eyes widening in surprise. George, you're donating everything to charity and establishing a scholarship in my honor. George grinned. The Stearns won't touch a penny. The scholarship will aid disadvantaged students pursuing law. I want to support others like you, Lily, people truly dedicated to justice. He paused, his expression softening. And the remainder, well, there are far worthier recipients than I. Tears shimmered in Lily's eyes. George, I don't know what to say. Say you'll witness it, he urged, handing her a pen. As she finalized the document, Lily realized she had done more than simply win a legal battle. She had helped restore a man's life, his dignity, and his belief in the system. And in the process, she had gained a friend to treasure always.